Chapter 29 is continuing to look at this progressive era, or this focus in American society where they are looking to change society for the better, to move away from the laissez-faire, from the Gilded Age. Except this time we're going to look at it from Woodrow Wilson's perspective, so from 1912 to 1916. Now, the 1912 election is an extremely important election in American history. The Democrats looking to seize upon the chaos that had been created within the Republican Party. Because remember, Teddy Roosevelt had tried to regain his party's nomination to take it back from William Howard Taft. He was unsuccessful at doing that. So the Democrats wanted to find their own reformer, or their own progressive, to nominate. Remember, progressivism goes across party lines. There are Republican progressives and there are Democratic progressives as well. And Woodrow Wilson was the Democratic progressive that they found to be their party's nominee in 1912. His campaign platform was known as New Freedom, focusing on three major areas: stronger antitrust legislation, reform the banking system, and lower the tariff. From Woodrow Wilson's perspective, he favored small enterprise, or small business, that you can let business competition work as long as it's in an unmonopolized market. Let's break down some of these larger corporations and then allow the free hand of the market to take its toll. You don't necessarily have to overly regulate everything from here on out. Just ensure that competition is occurring, according to Woodrow Wilson. Now, Teddy Roosevelt wasn't going to take the loss of his political party laying down, so he kind of hijacked the newly created Progressive Party, this new third party that is focusing on reforming society. It is more popularly referred to as the Bull Moose Party, because Teddy Roosevelt had famously said in an interview that he felt as strong as a bull moose, ready to take on the challenges of running for president for yet another term. And his platform here is New Nationalism, based on that speech that he had given in Osawatomie, Kansas in 1910. Now, Teddy Roosevelt's New Nationalism, he'd read this book, The Promise of American Life by Herbert Croly, which is where he got a lot of his ideas from, really focusing on social welfare, helping to change society for the better for the little guy down at the bottom. He also focused on that all corporations aren't necessarily bad. You know, this division between good trusts and bad trusts. If trusts are willing to behave, then allow them to stay intact. Otherwise, then we can break them apart. So Teddy Roosevelt at this time is in favor of using the government, protect labor, protect women, protect children, to really create more social programs to help society out. Now, in the end, Woodrow Wilson won with 435 electoral votes to Teddy Roosevelt's 88 and to Taft's 8 electoral votes. And even though Woodrow Wilson only won 41% of the popular vote, the real winner here was progressivism. Because if you look at the top two vote getters, people across the United States were voting for a progressive candidate, whether it was Teddy Roosevelt as the Bull Moose candidate or Woodrow Wilson as the Democratic candidate. They wanted progressivism. This also marked the end of the Bull Moose Party, because the focus had pretty much been on Teddy Roosevelt. And once he was gone, the party kind of withered on the vine. Here you see a political cartoon from the era. You see William Howard Taft riding the elephant, which is obviously the Republican Party, Woodrow Wilson on the donkey for the Democrats, and then Teddy Roosevelt on the bull moose, pulling at the butt of the elephant, keeping him back so that Woodrow Wilson can get ahead on their voyage up to the White House in the top corner. And then here you see the big three guys themselves who ran for president in 1912. Now, remember, Woodrow Wilson had focused on New Freedom in his campaign for 1912. Now that he has been elected president, he's really going to focus on these three areas to reform, or what he said, the triple wall of privilege needed to be attacked. He wanted to create tariff reform, banking reform, and trust reform to ensure that competition could actually work the way he wanted to. So the first of these three to be be attacked in this triple wall of privilege was the tariff. The Underwood Tariff Bill was signed into law, reducing the tariff from 40% down to 20%. This also established, for the first time in American history, an income tax, which was only possible because the 16th Amendment had recently been ratified. Now think about it. If you are in favor of real competition, a reduced tariff is one way to ensure that real competition is occurring. Make people buy your product based on the merit of the product and not just because it's more expensive than the foreign-made product. And public opinion really was on Woodrow Wilson's side to push this through. Aside from the tariff, the passage of the income tax, which we obviously still have around today with a graduated income tax, meaning that if you make more money, you pay a higher percentage of your taxes, meant that now for the first time, the majority of our country's revenue is going to come from an income tax rather than a high tariff. And this is also going to start to even out that distribution of wealth within the United States. The second on target for the triple wall of privilege is banking reform. From Woodrow Wilson's perspective and other Democratic progressives within his party, he said that the banks are really headed up by a money trust, as he called them. Also add to the fact that all of our economic downturns have had to do with the elasticity of our money. There hasn't been enough money in supply to account for these economic panics, like the one that occurred in 1907. We needed some sort of agency or some sort of governing body to oversee the expansion or contraction of our economy when it comes to the supply of money available to people. And so in 1908, a senator by the name of Nelson Aldrich came up with a committee, the Aldrich Plan, which basically said that we should create a central bank with 15 regional banks that will be governed by a national board of directors in order to give out emergency loans or to print more money in cases of an emergency, to put more money in the economy when it's necessary. But once again, people were worried about giving this kind of power to the money trust, because it would be big bankers that would be overseeing these 15 regional banks that Aldrich was proposing. So Congress had their own set of hearings, and in combination with the Democratic Congressman Arsène Pujol, they were looking at a way to change this, because these money trusts, or these big guys on Wall Street, are really controlling everything going on within American society, especially with the economy. And so the compromised bill that came out, which is what still affects us today, is the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. The Federal Reserve Act, this is kind of that combination of Pujol's bill and the Aldrich Plan, is a decentralized banking system with some government oversight. What is created and what we still have today are 12 regional district branches across the United States, each with their own board of directors, in order to see what's going on in their area. The Federal Reserve, the one that's located in Washington, D.C., would be headed up by 7 members that were appointed by the president. They act independently once they have been appointed, but they will give reports to the Senate about the state of the economy today. And what the Federal Reserve has the power to do is to issue Federal Reserve notes. This is what we think of when we think of paper money today. If you look at a dollar bill, it is from the Federal Reserve. So basically what the Federal Reserve is doing is they have the power to print more money and put it out into the economy when times look like they're getting bad, so that people have more money on hand to pay off debts or to settle issues that they have, or they have the power to contract the economy, to bring more money back in when it seems like the economy might get too inflated. They are also today handle the interest rates that we have on all loans, once again, to ensure that money is either flowing out there or being contracted in. So it's a much more fluid way to handle the economy than has been done prior to 1913. Here you see some of those bank notes that I referenced before, the Federal Reserve notes, which today, these are no longer in print. The highest bill that the Federal Reserve prints today is the $100 bill. So third on the list of Woodrow Wilson's targets for the triple wall of privilege are the trusts. It's time to bust up some trusts, but now Wilson style. In 1914, Congress passed the Federal Trade Commission Act. Basically, this is a new organization, the Federal Trade Commission, that's job is to look for monopolies in the United States who were using unfair trading practices. Unlawful competition or insider trading, false advertising, mislabeling of their product, adulteration, which we talked about before, is cutting good meat with bad, anything that was deemed to be unfair when it came to competition. Also, as a side note, it's to focus on protecting the consumer. So this is one step towards breaking apart the bad trusts. But in 1914, another major piece of legislation was passed, and you absolutely need to know this, the Clayton Antitrust Act. This is an expansion upon that Sherman Antitrust Act that we've already talked about. It created a wider definition of what was deemed to be unfair business practices. So, price discrimination, interlocking directorates, all of these would now be made illegal by the Clayton Antitrust Act. It also closed that loophole that had been created under the Sherman Antitrust Act by exempting labor unions and agricultural organizations. Because remember, the Sherman Antitrust Act had been used against these groups prior to this. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the glory days of unions are here. The courts are going to continue attacking unions for years to come, but at least it's on the books. In the future, we will see more power given to labor unions. And according to Samuel Gompers, he called the Clayton Antitrust Act the Magna Carta of labor because he felt it was so important to ensure the right of the people to organize. So that was Woodrow Wilson on the domestic side. Woodrow Wilson obviously had to deal with foreign issues as well. When Woodrow Wilson came to office, he was an anti-imperialist. Specifically, he'd been against dollar diplomacy. He was against imperialism, etc. He wanted to focus more on what was going on within the United States. In fact, he told companies that if they were investing in Latin America and the Caribbean, they would be punished for this because he didn't want to have to deal with other countries. They also, during his time in office, Congress repealed the Panama Canal Tolls Act that gave American businesses an exemption from having to pay the tolls on the Panama Canal. They now had to pay the same tolls that everyone else had to pay. Also under Wilson, they passed the Jones Act. This granted territorial status to the Philippines and then also promised them independence someday, which did in fact occur in 1946, which we'll talk about later. The problem with Woodrow Wilson's policies was that his high-minded ideas about anti-imperialism, anti-dollar diplomacy are all fine and good until he actually gets into office and things start to change. When the Haitian president was executed and a coup d'etat or an overthrow of the Haitian government looked like it was going to destabilize Haiti, Woodrow Wilson had to act because there were so many American citizens living there, American businesses there. So in 1915, the United States sent in the U.S. Marines to prop up the Haitian government. And actually, they occupied Haiti until 1934. The same occurred with the Dominican Republic in 1915 to stop the riots there and protect American business. So where he'd started out as anti-imperialism, the reality was he couldn't stick with that idea throughout his entire presidency. And also, Woodrow Wilson had the unfortunate problem of being president when World War I broke out in Europe. In Europe, that system of alliances had been going on. If you remember anything from world history, you've got the main militarism or the increase of military buildup of weapons, the system of alliances, the imperialism that caused competition between the different countries of Europe, and nationalism, that they wanted to prove how awesome they were. All of this really makes Europe into a powder keg at the time, waiting for that one spark to ignite Europe into a full-blown war. And that's what happened in 1914, when the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist nationalists. Serbia at this time was controlled by Austria-Hungary, and this nationalist group within Serbia thought that they could destabilize and possibly get their own country. So obviously Austria-Hungary is going to go to war with Serbia over this issue. But that system of alliances starts dragging people in, or other countries in. Germany, who had an alliance with Austria-Hungary, had to come to their aid. Serbia, on the other side, had an alliance with Russia because they had a common ethnic background. They were all Slavic. France, who had an alliance with Russia, also is dragged into this war. And so Germany, who had really been pulled in because of their alliance, decided, let's try to take France out before this war gets too big, and decided to attack France through Belgium, which had been a neutral country through the north. Great Britain, angry at the violation of Belgian neutrality, also comes to the aid of the Allied powers, as they were called. So on the one side of this system of alliances in Europe, and I know we're flying through this because this is European history, we have Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria are the major players in the Central Powers. They literally are the center of Europe. On the Allied power side, you have France, Great Britain, Russia, Serbia, Japan, Italy, and Belgium. And at least for the time being, the United States was focused on staying neutral. They didn't want to get dragged in. This is a European issue. And here you see Franz Ferdinand being executed, him and his wife as well, by a Serbian nationalist group, the Black Hand. Now, U.S. neutrality is all fine and good, but the problem is that the United States and Great Britain shares a common language. So all of the propaganda that was being circulated throughout Great Britain, the Americans could obviously understand. It was a natural draw to lure us in to the British side. But at the same time, though, there were 11 million people living in the United States who had a direct link to the Central Powers. Germans, Austro-Hungarians, etc., who wanted to side with the fatherland, love for the fatherland, because we are an immigrant nation. So, if anything, stay more neutral was the idea. In the beginning, at least, the United States had wanted to trade with both the Allies and the Central Powers as a way to make money. But the problem comes in that Great Britain blockaded the coast of Germany. There was no way for the United States to get goods and products to Germany. So there was only one solution: to trade with the Allies. Germany, angry over this and the fact that we were supplying the Allies, announced in February of 1915 unrestricted submarine warfare, meaning using those German U-boats to attack all of the shipping coming into Great Britain. And during this time, 90 ships were sunk by British or German U-boats. Also in May of 1915, the British ocean liner, the Lusitania, was sunk off the coast of Ireland. 128 Americans were on board. Americans are angry over this. How dare you sink this ship, even though, honestly, the British were sneaking on board ammunition and other weapons. But they are screaming for war, particularly the Jingos from the last war, like Teddy Roosevelt, want to see some action taken to protect American lives. The Germans had promised, okay, we'll stop with the unrestricted submarine warfare. We'll at least give warning shots, which was the pledge that they had made with the Sussex, after the Sussex was attacked. The United States is getting more and more drawn into this as more and more Americans are being killed during this war. Okay, so that Sussex pledge was, we promise to give warning before sinking your ship. And here you see the front page of the New York Times of the Lusitania being sunk. So in 1916, Woodrow Wilson runs on the platform of, he kept us out of war. This is really all the Democrats need to say. Even in the face of all of the Jingos screaming for war, a lot of Americans don't really want to be dragged into this war. The Republican Party doesn't really have a cohesive message behind their candidate, Charles Evans Hughes. And so in the end, because he kept us out of war, was so alluring to the American people, Woodrow Wilson easily won a lot of votes in the South and the West, whereas the Republican candidate, Charles Evans Hughes, only won the eastern states. It came down to the state of California, and in the end, because 3,800 people in the state of California voted for Woodrow Wilson, they got all of those electoral votes, and Woodrow Wilson was reelected for a second term, based on he kept us out of war. Too bad a year later, though, the United States would be in this war on the side of the Allies. And here you see the electoral map for 1916. And that is it for Chapter 29.